Welcome from the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter study group. This is, it is September. Look at this, I'm behind. September 7th of 2023. This is our 90th class. If you're new to us, that's not a typo. This really is our 90th class. We've been doing this for quite a while, and welcome. Tonight we're going to cover surveys or questionnaires, and we're going to also cover vendor assessment as the two techniques out of chapter 10. Our mission here at the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter is to bridge the gap between industry leaders and business analysts by building partnerships with professionals, educators, and employers so that we may empower, instruct, and engage the BA community. Our BA community is worldwide. Some of y'all are joining us live. Others of you are joining us by recording. We welcome you all. It doesn't matter where you live. If you are interested in raising your abilities as a business analyst, we welcome you. What we're doing is we're covering the techniques chapter of the IIBA's BABOK, the Book of Knowledge. And if you're interested in earning a certification, this is something you need to learn. If you're interested in honing your skills as a business analyst, this is always a good thing to have in your back pocket. We've given you a variety of ways to reach us. This is our regular study group, Thursday night, Eastern Time, 7 to 8 p.m. We will drop a link to our past meeting recordings in the chat. We also have an IIBA site, Meetup, Zoom, Facebook, LinkedIn. We've given you a variety of ways to reach us. So reach out and let us know if we've had any benefit to you. Let us know if you have any questions. That's what we're here for. If you're interested in taking any classes from our supporter, Watermark Learning, they've given us a discount code for everyone to be able to use. It's Tampa space 21. It will give you a 20% discount on any of their products, classes, practice study questions, whatever you need. They have business analysis as well as a couple of other topics. We are a volunteer-led organization. Cliff, our president, is here in the Millennium Falcon. Yulia is our vice president of finance. We have Caitlin and Priscilla as board members at large. My name is Thea Soehren. I'm the vice president of career and professional development for our chapter. And we are looking for a couple of more people who would like to be on the board. Not only would this be beneficial to you as being a board member for a IIBA chapter, but it may give you some skills and abilities that you didn't have before, or you may be able to use some that you haven't used in a while. We would welcome the conversation. No commitments. We are joined by Robert Churchill. You'll see him here. He is on a road trip, and he's joining us from his car because he is devoted and wonderful. Robert, we call him Bob, is a CBAP certified professional who has a bunch of other stuff after his name as well. He also has the rpchurchill.com website where he has a variety of really impressive and interesting, informative articles he's written, created. Many of them are about business analysis, but he has a variety of other things as well. I encourage you to check it out. You will find something there you didn't know before. Yulia often joins us as well. Yulia is a CBAP certified professional. She was a student in our class, and then she decided to go ahead and join us after she became certified so that she could help our chapter. Because these folks are here, this hour qualifies as an education credit whenever you go to apply to take your certification test. So we keep track of who attended, and we need these folks here to make this an education credit that's legitimate. We like to also keep track of the people that have earned certifications after they have worked with us. It just is kind of a feather in our cap. We put a lot of effort into this class. So whenever it's benefited people, we want to know about it. So if it's benefited you, let us know. Even if it's not a certification, if it's benefited you in any way, just reach out and let us know. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about two things. First one's going to be survey or questionnaire. And incidentally, we're interested in other people presenting information too. These are the techniques. We have a list of techniques that we've already covered. We'll make those available to you if you're interested in looking to see which techniques we haven't covered. This is our second time through the techniques chapter. But what we really need is people that will talk about what is in the BABOK, the Business Analysis Book of Knowledge. This is our certification book. You have to be able to answer questions based on what's in this book. So you have to know the book. So we go through the book and talk about these techniques, what's in the book, and then we're going to talk about our experiences with these specific techniques. And in that, I encourage your questions, your comments, and your experiences so we can have a conversation. The first technique we're going to cover tonight is survey or questionnaire. So for survey or questionnaire, the definition out of the BABOK, a survey or questionnaire is used to elicit business analysis information, including information about customers, products, work practices, and attitudes from a group of people in a structured way in a relatively short period of time. So basically, you need to get information from some group of people at some location or multiple locations, but you need to get that information brought back to you. And there's a couple of very important things you need to know about that. It presents a list of questions to stakeholders and subject matter experts, or SMEs, whose responses are then collected and analyzed in order to formulate knowledge about subject matter of interest. The questions can be submitted in a written form or can be administered in person, over the telephone, or using technology that can record responses. SurveyMonkey is a great way to do surveys. There are two types of questions used in a survey or questionnaire. There's the close-ended, which is a yes or no answer, or they choose a number or some specific answer. It's useful when an anticipated range of user responses is fairly well defined and understood. They're easier to analyze than those gained from open-ended questions because they can be tied to numerical coefficients. I'll talk about that in just a second. Let's talk about what an open-ended question is. It's free form. They don't select an answer from a list. There's no predefined responses. This is useful when the issues are known and the range of user responses are not. We know that there's an issue here, but we don't have any idea what the causes are or what your responses could be. And so instead of limiting you, and then you go, well, my answer's not on that list, we're going to open it up and leave it absolutely open. Open-ended questions may result in more detail and a wider range of responses than closed-ended questions. You're definitely going to get everything from people doing a one-word answer to people doing 3 paragraphs. It just depends on their personality, how enthusiastic or how aggravated they are about the situation. The responses to open-ended questions are more difficult and time-consuming to categorize, quantify, and summarize because they are unstructured and often include subjective language with incomplete or superfluous content. So let's talk about these two situations. I went into I had a survey that they wanted to know my experience with pizza, a specific place of pizza. They have 5 different kinds of pizza, so they knew what the different options were. Which kind did you pick? One of the 5. It was easy. It was a closed-ended question. I could pick the one I had selected to eat. They asked me what was my favorite topping. They knew exactly what the toppings were because of my previous answer. They asked me, was the pizza hot enough? Was it, yes, no questions, very, very closed-ended questions. These are easy. Whenever you're saying, I had answers from 30 people, 15 of the people gave me the same answer. So I have a 50-50 split on this answer. Let's talk about an open-ended question. If I'd gone to any pizza place, not a specific pizza place, and they wanted to know my experience with pizza, and they say, what kind of pizza do you get? It's an open-ended question. You're going to be able to put in any answer. You, as the person receiving the survey, you're not going to know what I mean because you don't know which store I went to, maybe. And even if you do know which store, I have an open-ended question ability, so I may put in what I remember the pizza to be called, or what my family always calls that pizza. We call it the good one. I don't know what it's really called. I don't know what that pizza store calls it. We call it the good one. If they say, what was your favorite topping? I can say the little round meat. Well, there could be 3 little round meats. You don't know what they're meaning if you don't make it very specific. However, if you're doing something that you need it to be open-ended, this is a great tool to use. Let's say, for example, you're trying to get an evaluation of this particular manager, and you say, what are your concerns with this particular manager? You're going to get everything. And that's exactly what you're wanting in this particular type of survey. You want everything. Your challenge with this is if they say this manager stinks, what does that mean? You're almost going to have a way of following up with that person to say, please help me understand what this means. So you have to really be very careful as you're crafting your questions of what is your goal? What kind of access do you have to these people? Is it anonymous? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important that you think about this as you move forward. Okay, let's move down. This is very important. Questions should not be asked in a way that does. Questions should be asked in a way that does not influence the response data. You cannot say, weren't you excited about receiving the bracelet? You would have to say, how do you feel about receiving the bracelet? You can't lead them. They should be expressed in a natural language. It should not be structured or sequenced to condition the respondent to provide perceived desirable answers. You don't want them to say, well, I think this is the answer they want, because then you skew your data. The elements. Preparing for a survey. An effective survey or questionnaire requires detailed planning in order to ensure that the needed information is obtained in an efficient manner. When preparing for a survey or questionnaire, business analysts do the following. Define your objective. A clear and specific objective establishes a defined purpose of the survey or questionnaire. Questions are formulated with the intent of meeting that objective. So you really, honestly, you need 2 or 3 people to work on those questions. One person comes up with them and the rest of them kind of go, oh, wait, we can't use that word. Or, oh, we have to you have to wordsmith these things. It's very important. Then you define your target survey group. You identify the group to be surveyed in terms of population size, any perceived variations, for example, culture, language, or location. This can help identify factors that can impact survey design. I will say that whenever you are trying to get information about a specific thing, you have to think about the demographics of the users of the specific thing. For instance, we had a survey for people that were bird watchers, that we were trying to get information about binoculars that bird watchers wanted in the following season. So you have to know who does bird watching. Where do they live? How much money do they make? What are their demographics? What cultures do they typically come from? And then you do surveys based on those specific things. If you did only bird watchers in Massachusetts, you're not going to get the information of bird watchers that are in Arizona, California, and Oregon. So you have to really be aware of who you're asking to take your survey. Choose the appropriate survey or questionnaire type. This determines the appropriate combination of closed-ended questions and open-ended questions to elicit information required. There is no rule that says they have to all be closed-ended or all be open-ended. You can do a combination, but the more closed-ended questions you ask, the easier it is to quantify. 25% people hated this one. 47% of the people love this one, and of those, 23% of the people did this thing. So you have ways to make decisions with closed-ended questions a lot more easily. Okay, then you select your sample group. Consider both the survey and the questionnaire type and the number of people in the identified user group in order to determine what's necessary and feasible to survey the entire group. You may do a sample portion of the entire group. You may survey all members, even of a large group, if their demographics indicate wide variances due to geographic distribution, regulatory differences, lack of standardization in job functions, or business process. If the population is large and the survey type is open-ended, it may be necessary to identify a subset of users in order to engage the questionnaire process. It is very hard to gather up all the information from a large group of open-ended questions. Using a statistical sampling method will help ensure that the samples selected the representative of the population so the survey results can be reliably generalized. Select the distribution of collection methods. Figure out the best way to communicate with the sample group. Again, SurveyMonkey is really good for things like this. Set the target level and timeline for response. Figure out what the response rate is acceptable. Let's consider if you send out 100 surveys and you only get 10 back. Are you going to respect the statistics you get out of a 10% return? I mean, do you need to get 30% back before you can say this is a good representative survey? And at that point, consider it close and complete. The actual response rate is lower than the acceptable threshold. If the actual response rate is lower than the acceptable threshold, the use of the survey results may be limited. Has anyone done a survey where you haven't gotten all the results back, the quantity of results back that you expected? Okay. Determine if the survey or questionnaire should be supported with individual interviews. A survey or questionnaire does not provide a depth of data that can be obtained from individual interviews. Consider either a pre or post survey or questionnaire interviews. Impossible if it's going to be anonymous. So you need a way to identify who is turning in each of those questionnaires or surveys. There is a way that you can use codes in the bottom left-hand corner if it's on paper. There's a whole million ways you can identify who receives what and where it comes from. You don't have to have people put their names on things. But if you're going to make them feel like it's anonymous, you're going to have to be a little bit sneaky about it. Write the survey questions. After you figured out the demographics, the quantity, what type of questions, what your goal is, everything else, then write your survey questions. And be sure that all the questions support your stated objectives. And then test the survey or questionnaire. A usability test identifies the errors and opportunities for improvement. So you kind of need a sample of your respondents to do a pre-survey and run through it and be sure you're not getting surprises. It's really good if you get people who are very analytical and very nitpicky and very literal to do this step. These are the people that will say, well, you've got a double negative there. I don't know what you mean. Or they'll say, you've got 4 answers on everything else and you got 6 on this one. And it confused me. Yeah. They will say the things that nobody else will say, but the other people will still respond to it. So you have to get the people that will give you the feedback. Then distribute the survey or questionnaire. It's important to communicate the survey's objective, how its results will be used, as well as any arrangements for confidentiality or a net, you know what I mean, that will have been made so that people can stay anonymous. When deciding on a method of distribution, in-person, email, or survey, consider the urgency of obtaining the results, the level of security required, and the geographic distribution of the respondents. I have participated in surveys and I've given surveys that we said, hey, whenever we leave stand-up today, we're going to ask everybody to go back and pull this out of your email and fill it out in the next 10 minutes. It shouldn't take you more than 5 minutes. And it's just making those arrangements ahead of time gets you kind of a higher response rate and gets it to you quicker. Then you document the results. Documenting the results of the survey or questionnaire, we collate the responses, summarize the results, evaluate the details, and identify any emerging themes. Formulate categories for encoding the data and break down the data into measurable increments. Usage considerations. This is quick and relatively inexpensive to administer. It's easier to collect information from larger audiences than other techniques such as interviews. You can't interview people quickly like that. Does not typically require significant time from the respondents. Effective and efficient when stakeholders are geographically dispersed. When using close-ended questions, survey can be effective for obtaining quantitative data for use in statistical analysis. And when using open-ended questions, survey results may yield insights and opinions not easily attained through other elicitation techniques. I've seen many cases where whenever you're talking about how can we improve processes, what kind of changes would you like to see, people will come out with, this person is being abusive, or we're seeing favoritism here, or y'all are changing processes on us every 2 weeks and it's making people want to quit. You don't get that any other way. But be ready. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to. Be ready to deal with the results, because if they speak and you don't have a response that they can see, they're not going to speak again. You're not going to get that opportunity again. Limitations. To achieve unbiased results, specialized skill in statistical sampling methods are needed when surveying the subset of potential respondents. The response rate may be too low for statistical significance. Once again, if you send out 100 surveys and only 3 people respond, is it really worth it? Use of open-ended questions requires more analysis. Ambiguous questions may leave unanswered or answered incorrectly, and may require follow-up questions for more survey iterations depending on the answers provided. So you really have to figure out what you're committed to, how important it is, how focused you want to be on this, so that you can achieve your goal. So has anyone here used surveys or questionnaires? I just have a few questions for you, if you have, so we can have a conversation.
I've used some surveys and questionnaires. I'm going to close my blinds a little bit.
Okay. Go ahead, Carl.
Okay. Open for your questions.
Okay. I'd like to know, what was your goal in using a survey or questionnaire?
Well, currently we're using one right now for the intake application for some of the documents that we receive in our college, and also the amount of use, and if it still needs to go through a process where we extract some data from it.
Okay, so it's a process improvement and documentation method.
Yes.
Correct? So do you normally, so is it closed-ended questions? Do you give them multiple choice answers?
This particular one is pretty much closed-ended. I have used open-ended before. I think in most cases, the question, I was going to chime in for the question that you asked earlier. In most cases, you've got to follow up no matter what type of question you ask, because either the end users or stakeholders may have some other interpretation sometime for your for the questions that you ask, or just not pay attention. But and so it's always good to be as clear, concise, and think through potential answers that your end users / stakeholders might use before finalizing that questionnaire.
Is the questionnaire or survey that you use something that is required for them to participate in the process, or is it an optional thing?
I would say it's not necessarily optional, because we are going to follow up with anyone that hasn't, but the people that are, not everyone that fills it out is listed as a stakeholder.
Okay.
Some are end users and not necessarily a stakeholder. So
the people that fill it out, what kind of percentage of response are you getting overall?
Well, we are following up with them, so we're going to have 100%.
Will be 100%.
But initially, I would say somewhere in the range of about 75–80%.
That's a really good rate. One of the challenges with surveys typically is we get a lower response because they have no reason to invest their time and effort into filling out surveys. But if it's part of the process, you can get a higher response.
And And I think that one of the considerations we also explored was using focus groups for the survey, but we decided to go ahead and put it out for but however, even though it's still a larger audience, it's not like the entire college. These are specific departments, specific people within the departments, a little wider range than the focus group, but just about everybody has some stake in it. And so thus the higher initial percentage rate.
Have you or anyone else found a method to motivate people to fill out surveys more consistently? I've seen people give out cash.
Prizes. Yeah, prizes, coupons, specials. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
There's a method that I've seen that's been effective whenever you will call out, John always fills in his survey within the first 10 minutes of whatever, and it's just like, okay, so you put John up here on a pedestal, and if John is an extrovert, that's okay. It's not okay if John's an introvert. Don't do that to John. But if John's an extrovert and he doesn't mind being called out, everybody else kind of goes, I want people to think that I'm that good too. And so they'll be more likely to do it the next couple of times at least. Give people
peer pressure.
Yeah.
There
is peer pressure, but if you do it as a positive reinforcement, people are more likely to participate.
Or buy-in from their boss and a reference to that in the letter as well.
That's always a good thing. Managerial direction of this is important.
Yes.
Spend 5 minutes in getting it done. Let's just talk a few minutes about structuring your questions in surveys and questionnaires. The more simple you can make these, don't spend 5 words when you can use 1. Don't use complicated words whenever you can use simple ones. Stun them with simplicity, but make it clean on the page. If you've got 5 questions, put it on a 8.5 by 11 page. If you print it out, they go, oh, this there's not very much here. If you put it on a quarter piece of paper, they're going to go, there's too much, Spread it out a little bit, make it easy, put it in columns so they can say, here's the question, here's all the yeses, here's all the nos, or whatever. Just make it where visually they don't feel intimidated by it and they're more likely to tackle it. Give them good directions on how to turn it in. If it's electronic, submit at the bottom in a big button. Don't make it hard for them to figure out how to submit their information. And if there's specific things that are required, put required on it, put the required asterisk beside it if they must put in their department number or if they must put in something. That way they don't have to think, okay, what's a minimum I can do on this? It's easy for them to see the minimum that they have to do. So just make it clear, easy, and quick for them, and you're more likely to get good results, or at least higher numbers of results.
Thea?
Yes.
I'd like to add a little different perspective to this, because something we run into all the time, because we build CRM systems and ERP systems and back-end systems, all kinds of fun stuff. And the customization.
I'm going to stop you. Some people don't know your acronyms.
Oh, sorry. Okay. CRM is customer relationship management. So it keeps track of all your customers in a database, addresses, sales orders, those kinds of things. ERP system is your billing system usually. But what I was going to say is, like, when we design forms and the databases in the back end, how everybody has a system and you design your forms and you can customize your fields and those kinds of things. We have to talk so many customers sometimes out of doing this exact thing. Oh, open-ended. I want this field and I want it to be a 200-character text field where I can type in anything I want. And it is very hard to get insights when you have 1 million customers and you're trying to pull up that field and do anything with it. Because let's face it, the ultimate goal about all this reporting and all these surveys and everything else is to come up with a report that you can use and make decisions with.
Right.
So we talk to a lot of people, if you can do what's called an option set. So when you get a field, you have 5 selections that you can pick. Those kinds of things, so that when you do a report, it's much easier to get some insights from it. And it's the same kind of structure you're talking about with a questionnaire or a survey. And, you were talking about sneaky ways with a survey. If you ever look at the URLs a lot of times that you have to click on, you'll notice like a 32 character something in the middle of it.
Yeah.
We call that a GUID. That usually is an individual GUID just for you. So when you click that URL, we know exactly who you are without you typing in anything, because we have your customer record or your email address tied to that GUID somewhere. So we know, that's just one of the tricks of the trade. If you look at a URL, you'll see something like that in the URL that is actually unique to just you. So that when you click on it, boom, I know who you are and I know what your responses are. I don't even have to bother asking your name, sometimes your address and all that kind of stuff, because I've got a customer record on you already. So it's another thing you can do to make the survey a little easier for people, because one thing that annoys people is if they have to type in their name and address and all that kind of stuff in a survey. You already know that. So you're just asking them the questions, letting them fill it out, and they don't know any the wiser.
Okay. Has anyone else had any experience with surveys or questionnaires that you'd like to share? Yes, Bob.
So when I gave a series of talks to different IIBA chapters about 5 years ago, 4 or 5, I asked a series of open-ended questions. And the reason I did that was because the number of responses was like 10 to 20 at each talk. So it was limited. And I was trying to learn qualitative things. So, in a case like Cliff was talking about, when you're talking about large numbers of respondents that you need to get some kind of definitive answer for, you tend to make them more numerical and closed-ended, and in smaller learning kind of situations, you want to be more open-ended. So the purpose of your survey will drive its format.
I agree. One of the things that we like to do here is, how did you hear about the study group? Because that tells us where our marketing is working. Cliff is an awesome marketing person, but if he knows that 90% of the people are hearing about it through Meetup, we're going to focus most of our efforts on Meetup. That would be a closed-ended question with, a select number of answers. If you wanted to ask the question, what do you want to learn? That would probably be an open-ended question, because there's a huge variety of things that people might want to learn. So whenever we have to think about what is our goal for the survey or questionnaire, it has a lot to do with what are we trying to get from you, and what do we want to deliver to you, and how are we going to use the information we receive. Okay, anything else for surveys or questionnaires? We'll go to vendor assessment. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, vendor assessment, technique 49 of 50. The purpose is assessing the ability of the vendor to meet commitments regarding the delivery and the consistent provision of a product or service. So let me tell you, very infrequently do business analysts actually work with vendor assessment, but occasionally you do. And your input is important because there's some things about vendor assessment that the typical person wouldn't think about. So this is important for you to be aware of these aspects. Whenever your solutions are provided entirely or partially by external vendors, and these vendors may be involved in the design, construction, implementation, or maintenance of the solution or solution components, or when the solution is outsourced, somebody else is going to do it for you. There may be specific requirements in regard to the involvement of the third party. They may need to ensure the supplier is financially secure, capable of maintaining specific staffing levels, compliant with standards, and able to commit appropriate skilled staff to support the solution. Non-functional requirements can be used to define the service levels expected of a third party. Due diligence may be conducted, or certification from an independent authority may be requested. A vendor assessment is conducted to ensure the vendor is reliable, that the product and services meet the organization's expectations and requirements. The assessment may be formal through a submission of a request for information, RFI, request for quote, RFQ, request for tender, RFT, or request for proposal, and RFP. People will throw around those acronyms like you're supposed to know what they mean. Here's the list. And your organization, if it's of any size, those probably have standards of what exactly they require. It may be very informal through word of mouth and recommendations. The standards of the organization and the complexity of the initiative and the criticality of the solution may influence the level of formality in which each vendors are assessed. So let's talk about finding your vendor. The knowledge and expertise of the vendor can be something that you hear about by the reputation or by word of mouth, but you need to figure out how are you going to legitimately evaluate that. Because I'm going to tell you, vendors have marketing people who will say, oh, yes, we can do that. And it doesn't necessarily mean they've ever done it before, or they have any idea what they're talking about, or that they have the capacity to do it. But they will say they can do it because that's what salespeople do. They promise the moon. It's also
sorry, that hit a nerve.
It's also what executives love to hear. Oh, they're the ones we're going to choose because they can do it. The executives don't necessarily know how to get the project done on the boots on the ground level. And so you got the people up here that don't know how to do the project, talking to the people over here who are not necessarily telling the whole truth about how they can help you. And you're down here in the trenches with the guys with boots on the ground going, what are they doing to us? So if you can get involved in the vendor assessment, it's a really good thing. The licensing and pricing models, you got to take into account in cases where solution or solution component is purchased from or outsourced to a third-party vendor. In many cases, solutions that offer similar functionality may differ greatly in their licensing models. Here's an example. In the organization I'm currently with, we have access to the Dun & Bradstreet information. Dun & Bradstreet information is in different buckets. There is the main bucket. Out of the box, you should have access to these 400 fields. Well, if you want 200 of those fields, you might have to pay an extra fee. You may only have access to those fields up to a certain level, say 500 a month. What's going to happen if you need 600 a month? Or if 1 month you're doing your implementation, you need 10,000. What are the pricing levels? And you need to be aware of that, because whenever you're doing development and you're talking about bringing in data, you need to be able to say, we're going to do a test batch of this, knowing you're not going to go over your licensing agreement levels. You're not going to be penalized. You're not going to have a higher rate, things like that. Let's see. requires analysis of different usage scenarios to determine which option will provide the best cost benefit ratio under the scenarios likely to be encountered by the enterprise. So you need to be talking to the guys with boots on the ground of what are the scenarios we're likely to encounter before you go, to these talks and say, what are the packages you're offering? How can you deliver this to us? What happens if the knowledge transfer is incomplete? What happens if, etc. You need to have contingencies in place for each of these. The vendor's market position. It's important to be able to compare each vendor with their competitors and decide which market players of the organization wants to get involved. The comparison of the organization's profile with each vendor's customer community may also be a factor in the assessment. Let's say if you're talking about using Jira versus Rally. Very similar functionality in some things, very different functionality in other things. One of them is produced by Atlassian. I forgot who the other one's produced by. Atlassian has a huge worldwide influence so you're going to get things that would hit different cultures differently. They've already considered it. The other one doesn't necessarily have it. So you have to really think about who are they working with already? Who are they being influenced by already? The dynamics of the vendor's market position is also very important, especially if the organization intends to establish a long-term partnership with that vendor. I worked with a marketing organization, KPM, I'm sorry, too many acronyms. Anyway, it's a marketing organization in Kansas City. It's VMLY&R. And what we discovered is we would take on clients, and some of the clients would head different direction than we expected them. And we had to decide if we were going to continue relationship with that client. And they're clients, not vendors, but in some ways they impact us just like a vendor would. So you have to think about what are their practices? How do they run their business? Is it something that you want to invite into your home? Terms and conditions refer to the continuity and integrity of the provided products and services. The organization investigates whether the vendor's licensing terms, intellectual property rights, and technology infrastructure are likely to turn into challenges if the organization later chooses to transition to another supplier. A company that we worked with chose to transition to AWS. What is it? Amazon
Web Services.
Thank you. Amazon Web Services. I've called it AWS for so many years, I don't remember anymore. But it was at the very beginning of AWS rolling out. So there were lots of things to overcome. But because they chose to do it early, their problems became our problems. So you kind of have to know what is their plan for their technology if it's going to impact you that way. There may be also be considerations regarding the vendor's use of and responsibility for protecting the organization's confidential data. In many organizations, if you have any kind of confidential data or data that is controlled by any regulation, you've got to have special clauses for things like that. Because if you give someone keys to the kingdom and they misuse those, it comes back on you. And you can't pull back in data that's been released onto the web, or somebody's using an AI because they think it's cool, and then the AI has now access to everything, and now everyone has access to that AI. It gets very, very sticky. The terms under which customizations of the product will be executed, as well as availability of the regular update schedule and roadmap of features that are planned for delivery, are considered. We have a we have a vendor that they have given us the ability to use their product. However, if we want to make changes to the configuration, we have to put in a ticket and have them do it. So we don't really have access to managing the tool that we are using. We just have access to using the tool. And in some cases, that's just fine. In other cases, that's not okay, because their level of delivery on those tickets sometimes can be weeks to get those things done. So you need to really be aware of what's the practice, what are the guaranteed levels, what happens if they don't meet the guaranteed level. Is there a monetary penalty if they don't meet this? You know, all of that needs to be considered. And although this is part of vendor evaluation, it's getting into the legalities of the contract. And so the more you get into vendor evaluation, you're going to be working with the legal team as well. Vendors' experiences with other customers may provide valuable information on how likely it is that they will be able to meet their contractual and non-contractual obligations. Vendors can also be evaluated for conformance and compliance with external relevant standards for quality, security, and professionalism. So ask your friends that have worked with them. What did you think? What were your challenges? What were the good things? Who did you work with? Are they still with the company? Things like that. It may be necessary to request that steps be taken to ensure that there are no risks if a vendor encounters financial difficulties, and that will be possible to maintain and enhance the solution even if the vendor's situation changes radically. You know how many companies close their doors. Without warning, they close their doors. If you have them providing a service for you and they close their doors, can you continue to function? So it's something you have to really be aware of. It sounds pretty scary, but it's scary if you don't check off these things ahead of time. So the strengths increases the chances of the organization to develop a productive and fair relationship with a suitable and reliable vendor and to improve long-term satisfaction with the decision. Limitations may be consuming in regards to time and resources, definitely. Does not prevent risk of failure as the partnership evolves, and subjectivity may bias the evaluation outcome. So let's say that I have a company that I used to work for, and I'm saying, hey, you guys should use this company. They have everything you want. Guys, I'm automatically biased. I don't care if I do have insight and knowledge and experience. I can provide those things, but you cannot trust me to make a good decision for the good of the company because I have a bias toward this particular vendor. Take my information, cut me out of the decision-making process at that point. It's the only way you can make a good, unbiased decision. Let me say with vendor evaluation, there's no way to know 100%. And you never know until you get in there and start working with them if they're going to be as good as they said they would. You need to have a way in place so that if something starts kind of going off the rails, you can say, wait a minute, this is our goal. This is what we're working for. This thing, this, meeting, this whatever is not productive. We need to change things. Having a good, strong project manager is a really good benefit in this case. But if you can do the vendor evaluation ahead of time, it's best thing you can do. If the PM has gotten in there with the vendor evaluation and has created that relationship ahead of time, that's good too. You need to have those relationships with the mid-level people that you'll be working with and kind of be able to raise the flag if you see a problem. That's where your partnership with your PM or your product owner or whomever is beneficial, so that you can say, I have a concern about this, or I'm not seeing this meeting our timeline. Having timelines that are graphic, a literal timeline. On this date, we're going to do this. On this day, we're going to achieve this. On this day, we're going to roll this out, and be able to show that in the meetings of how you're being able to reach those goals. It's a really good way to say we're all on the same team and this is what we agreed to. And are we ahead or behind schedule? What comments do y'all have?
Lots. I could talk about vendors for a while.
Tell us your experience.
Well, like we were talking about before, I work for a Microsoft partner, so we do a lot of Microsoft work. But I'm sure you guys have dealt with executives all the time that love to use the word cloud. I want my stuff in the cloud. I want cloud, 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 cloud. And they don't understand or have a clue about what the cloud is. Basically, you're putting everything you do on somebody else's network and using the internet to connect to it. It's really that simple. The problem with that is all your stuff is on somebody else's network. And this was unfathomable 20 years ago. If you would have told me 20 years ago, people would willingly do this, I would have told you we're nuts, but I get paid very good to do this for people. But part of this vendor stuff that you were talking about there, Thea, is a very good point. When you got customers like Oracle, Microsoft, Salesforce, this is where a lot of this stuff comes up into play, is like, okay, well, you're dealing with bigger companies. So, the uptime, do they have the infrastructure to say, okay, well, if this one server farm goes down, is my whole product going to go down? Or, the worldwide kind of stuff. Smaller vendors might have that problem. If they lose their servers, they lose you. Yeah, I could go on a bunch of different tangents on this thing, but the key conversation I have with a lot of executives is just not knowing what the cloud is. It's
right,
and it's very important with dealing with vendors. We get a lot of clients with surprise bills because and this happens with Salesforce and Microsoft. I just know Microsoft very well. It's when you put all your data out on their servers and you're using services like Synapse or Microsoft Azure, you're basically using their servers to process all your data. Well, you get charged for that. And if you don't comprehend how much data you're processing, how much data you're storing, you can get a hefty bill. That's part of the whole vendor conversation you just had there. Prices are becoming very, very difficult to compute. Because I actually have conversations with Microsoft all the time with people from Microsoft, and they don't understand their own billing because they change it. I mean, you run a process on 1 million records and they charge you based on the server time that you're using in processing those records. And that, unfortunately, that constantly changes. And it makes it very difficult. One, you don't always know how much data you're processing, and two, that your supplier might not even know how much they're charging you to process that data all the time because it's constantly changing. So this is going to be something that's going to be a problem for many, many, many years because everybody's going cloud, putting everything on everyone else's servers. But
right.
I'll shut up now. But just something I could contribute tonight. Yay!
Yay! Thanks, Cliff. Yes, Bob.
CEOs definitely are subject to the disease of wanting things they read about in CEO Buzzword magazine without really having any idea of what they're asking for. AI is a big one currently. We gotta be AI. They have no idea what AI is. That's the new cloud. So yesterday was cloud, today it's AI, tomorrow who knows. Anyway, the other thing about vendor assessment is who's going to do all the work. So if you're hiring a vendor, you might want to actively evaluate them based on information you can learn. You might ask them some things, but I can tell you a lot of government entities make you do all the work. So they give you an insanely detailed template and you got to fill it out. And if you mess up any tiny little jit or jot of it, they throw it out. And I will tell you, the city of New York, that was the most onerous application and bid process I have ever seen. The people are out of their minds. So there was a lot of ways to evaluate things, and who knows what you'll run into.
True. There's two things I want to just be sure that you're aware of. We were talking about, can the company do the job if they have a problem? One of the problems I have seen is they had a rock star developer that left halfway through the project and nobody else could do the job because the rockstar developer had created such complex code that they were the only ones who could do anything with it. That's not what you want. Another thing I've seen, and you do vendor evaluations and whenever you do storage on your own phone, if you use Google or something else to store things, I've seen them do this. They take my pictures and they store the same picture over and over and over and then tell me I've run out of space. Well, I didn't have a vendor agreement that said every image was going to be unique. If I were writing a vendor agreement, I would say every image is going to be unique if you're going to store it for me. But they store the same picture every single day, the same 50 pictures every single day. I ran out of space. But you have to be very, very literal in your contracts. Get somebody who's good with contract law, who understands technology, so that they can write for the developing side and they can write for the business side both. Any other comments or questions before we close?
Well, this is actually near and dear to my heart right now because I just this afternoon submitted an RFP for consideration. So that nice little RFP acronym was timely. And I like to just echo what Cliff and Robert were saying as well. I mean, most of the time we've run into the management request for the moon. And as you gather the requirements from the business and from some of and understand what the capabilities are of some of the vendors that you're looking to obtain demos from and or eventually hire, then you find out that the salesman did promise the world, and you have to level set at some point your management and let them know that this is really what we're looking at from the vendor standpoint, what their capabilities are. Mm-hmm. And then also Robert touched on a very crucial point, and that is if you have your own IT that's on site, you will want to try to quantify what type of work it's going to involve for them, because it's not just that you can sign a contract and the vendor takes, well, sometimes, but most of the time these days, especially for cloud related or SaaS related processes, there's going to be some effort on the part of the entity who's wanting to sign that vendor up. And so kind of quantifying that's one of the things that we have been attempting to do just this past week, to quantify how much work it's going to take our IT folks if and when we go with a few of the vendors that we're considering.
Let me talk about one thing. The integrations, if you're asking some company to come in and provide, let's say Workday. We had Workday come in and they were providing human resources, recruiting, and payroll and accounting for different modules. For us to get Workday installed, Workday is easy, right? It has everything in it. We were integrating it with a 30-year-old company that had homegrown systems. The integration was hellacious because they weren't designed to integrate with Workday. They were designed for something 20 years ago. multiple languages, multiple systems, multiple crosswalks. That part was the hard part. Workday was the easy part. For the most part. I mean, Workday couldn't do everything we had created in some of our homegrown systems, but we figured that part out. You have to talk to the folks that have boots on the ground. I would always encourage you to talk to other people and other companies that are in similar positions that have used that organization for the same type of project. That is your very best way to say, what problems did you have? Tell me your horror stories and tell me your victories. Those are the folks that will be able to tell you the real experiences. We were recommended a company to implement a certain product, and they were the #1 implementers. They were horrible. The salesmen had been very good. The people that we had to work with were not quite what the salesman promised. So I will say that anytime you work with a vendor, you're not going to get everything the salesman promises. But if you do your research, you can make the best choice on which vendor you're going to go with. And then once you make a choice on a vendor and you sign a contract, y'all are part of the same team. You're going to have to make it work the best you can. If you have guidelines in your contract, though, that says if you do this or this or this, there's a penalty of this, if you don't make this target or whatever, give them a reason to help you succeed. That makes it painful for them if they don't help you succeed. Okay?
I'd like to throw one other thing in there, Thea, because
yes,
one
Cliff.
thing that we started doing at our company is we made some of the heads in like data that specialized in data, specialized in the actual application, and those kinds of things, part of the sales process. We don't let salespeople talk to customers by themselves. And that doesn't just protect us, that protects the customer. But if I was on the customer side and I was dealing with a vendor, I'd want some of that vendor's developers, or at least heads of certain departments that deal with certain things, on some of those calls, so that when the salesperson says, God, I deal with this all the time, I want to integrate this application with this application, I want the data here and I want it there, and my God, they ask for it real time. They think, oh, I enter something here, it's going to show up over there, and vice versa, which is like a huge no-no. But if you only have salespeople on the call, they will promise the moon, and then it gets to people like me who have to implement it and say no. Kind of bypasses that.
Right. So get your SMEs from your organization involved in the conversation for the evaluation. And that way you can be sure that they're speaking correctly, instead of just saying, oh yeah, we can do it. It's good to be able to do it. It's good whenever you can explain how you do it with confidence and experience. Okay, folks, we're going to wrap it up. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We will see you here next Thursday. I'm going to be halfway across the country. Bob is going to be halfway across the country by then. And I hope the rest of y'all stay safe. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
All right, guys, have a good night.
Bye, you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.